At the onset of the American Revolutionary War, the stark contrast between a well-regulated British military and the untrained American militias led to a series of early American losses that demoralized the colonial forces. By the end of 1776, many feared the war was all but lost. However, quick victories in late 1776 and early 1777, such as those at Trenton and Princeton, bolstered morale even if they didn't significantly increase enlistments. The real turning point came with the American victory at Saratoga in September of 1777. This crucial battle not only reinvigorated American hopes, but also convinced France to formally intervene on the American side, a decision that dramatically shifted the course of the war. France, which had been secretly smuggling supplies to the American rebels since May of 1777, saw Saratoga as proof that the Americans had a chance of winning the war. So in December of 1777, Benjamin Franklin arrived in France as an agent of Congress, tasked with securing a formal alliance and ensuring that the flow of French supplies continued. Franklin, with his rustic and charming persona, captivated the French aristocracy, presenting himself as the quintessential backwoods American. His diplomacy bore fruit when in February of 1778, France signed two critical treaties with the United States, a commercial agreement that opened trade between the two nations, and an alliance treaty. This alliance recognized American independence and committed France to fighting alongside the Americans until Britain conceded that independence. Importantly, France agreed to this alliance without seeking territorial gains in North America. Britain, in response to the Franco-American Treaty, declared war on France, shifting its military focus towards a global conflict rather than concentrating solely on suppressing the American rebellion. Spain, eager to avenge past defeats and protect its own North American territories, soon joined France in the war against Britain. However, the French alliance did not lead to a swift American victory. Instead, the war turned into a prolonged conflict of attrition. The entrance of France, and later Spain, complicated British war efforts, but also trained American society, which had become increasingly divided as the war dragged on. The French intervention, though crucial, transformed the conflict into a larger geopolitical struggle, stretching far beyond the American colonies. The decision to join the British war effort during the American Revolution was driven by different considerations for Loyalists, African Americans, and Native Americans, all of whom faced distinct risks and potential rewards. Loyalists were American colonists who remained loyal to the British Crown, and their motivations were often deeply tied to their status and property. After the American victory at Saratoga, many Loyalists recognized that a British defeat would mean severe consequences for them. By aligning with the British, they risked losing their homes, businesses, and social standing if the revolutionaries won. This fear was well-founded, as many American states actively banished Loyalists, confiscating their property as punishment for their loyalty to Britain. Consequently, after the British defeat, a significant number of Loyalists fled to Canada, where they hoped to rebuild their lives free from retribution they faced in the newly independent United States. For African Americans, the Revolutionary War presented a potential path to freedom, though their decisions about which side to support varied by region. In the South, many enslaved Africans believed that joining the British Army offered the best chance for emancipation. The British often promised freedom to enslaved individuals who fled their patriot masters and fought for the Crown, making the British Army a beacon of hope for Southern enslaved people. By contrast, many Northern enslaved individuals saw a greater possibility for emancipation with the American cause, as some Northern states began to question the institution of slavery during the war. Despite the immense risks involved in fleeing to British lines, where they faced death or capture, many enslaved Africans who made it behind British lines did win their freedom. For Native Americans, the war posed a direct threat to their land and way of life. Many Native American groups viewed an American victory as a precursor to further westward expansion and the loss of their lands. Convinced that a British victory would help curtail American encroachment, many tribes chose to side with the British. Early in the war, however, some Native groups sought to remain neutral, unsure of how the conflict would unfold. But as the war progressed, violent conflicts in the backcountry, coupled with growing animosity between settlers and Native Americans, solidified alliances between many tribes and the British. These alliances were driven by the belief that the British were the best hope for preserving their territories in the face of an American expansionist ambition. Each group, Loyalists, African Americans, and Native Americans, made calculated decisions about which side to support based on their own interests, hoping to secure safety, freedom, or the protection from the consequences of an American victory. However, the ultimate defeat of the British left many of them in precarious positions, with Loyalists fleeing, Native Americans suffering further land losses, and only some African Americans achieving the freedom they sought. The territorial changes brought about by the American Revolution were significant and set the stage for westward expansion in the United States. The war formally ended with the Treaty of Paris in 1783, which granted the newly formed United States control over territory east of the Mississippi River. However, this territorial gain did not lead to immediate and uncontested expansion. Clashes with Native American groups stalled westward movement, as many tribes resisted American encroachment on their lands. Expansion into areas like Kentucky and Tennessee happened more rapidly since fewer Native Americans lived there, but other regions proved much riskier and faced more resistance. The territorial expansion also created challenges for Congress, which found itself in a difficult position. On one hand, Congress did not want to blatantly encroach on native lands, as doing so could provoke more conflicts. On the other hand, the government had promised land to soldiers who had fought in the Revolutionary War as a form of compensation. These competing interests pushed Congress to seek a more organized approach to western expansion. As various states ceded their land claims, Congress established the Northwest Territory through the Northwest Ordinance. This legislation outlined the creation of 3 to 5 new states, provided a clear path to statehood, included a clause prohibiting slavery in the new territories, and emphasized the importance of public education. The Northwest Ordinance became a key framework for managing Western settlement and ensuring orderly expansion. In addition to territorial changes, the American Revolution spurred several social changes. Moves towards religious freedom gained momentum, and gradual emancipation began in northern and middle states, signaling a slow shift in attitudes towards slavery in certain regions. The war also had a profound impact on women, many of whom had to take on greater responsibilities at home while their husbands were away fighting. This period saw a shift in marital relationships as well, with marriages increasingly based on mutual affection rather than purely on property settlements or economic interests. The concept of the Republican mother emerged during this time, advocating for women to have access to education. The reasoning behind this was that educated women could teach their children, especially their sons, principles of patriotism and civic duty, thereby playing a crucial role in shaping the future of the Republic. These changes reflected the broader ideological currents of the Revolution, which encouraged new ways of thinking about freedom, citizenship, and the role of individuals within society. The economic problems that emerged after the Revolutionary War were a major factor in the demise of the Articles of Confederation. When the war ended, the United States faced a severe economic depression. A large trade deficit developed, primarily because British merchants flooded the American market with exports that American consumers could not afford. Trade with France and other European nations was insufficient to close this gap, leading to a growing economic imbalance. At the same time, private debts mounted as merchants, unable to collect payments, began suing customers for non-payment. This created a widespread financial crisis, particularly for farmers, many of whom were unable to pay taxes due to crop failures. Facing foreclosures and economic ruin, these farmers turned to state governments for relief. In response to the economic struggles, some states passed stay laws, which postponed the due dates for debt repayment. However, in Massachusetts, the legislature rejected these stay laws and instead raised taxes, worsening the situation for struggling farmers. This led to Shays' Rebellion in 1786, a movement loosely organized by former Revolutionary War officer Daniel Shays. Farmers in Massachusetts, many of whom were veterans, gathered to prevent the state courts from confiscating property for unpaid debts. They also threatened military action against the state government. Although the rebellion was suppressed, it caused significant concern among those who had previously resisted the idea of a strong central government. The uprising demonstrated that the weak central government under the Articles of Confederation could not prevent domestic unrest, fueling fears of mob rule. Shays' rebellion also reflected a broader problem with the government's inability to address fiscal issues. The Confederation Congress was responsible for national finances, but it had no power to directly tax citizens. Instead, it relied on requisitions, requests for money from the states to fund its operations and pay off war debts. This system proved unreliable, as many states failed to provide the full amount of money requested. As foreign debt payments came due, the government found itself without enough funds to pay its creditors, further exposing flaws in the Articles of Confederation. The growing realization that the requisition method was not sustainable pushed many leaders to advocate for stronger central authority and a revision of the existing government framework. These economic struggles, along with the fears sparked by Shays' rebellion and the fiscal crises facing Congress, convinced many that the Articles of Confederation were insufficient for governing the young nation. This set the stage for the Constitutional Convention of 1787, where the delegates sought to create a more effective and robust national government capable of addressing the economic and political challenges the United States faced. The conditions of the United States in the 1780s significantly shaped the outcome of the Constitution, as the country faced deep political divisions, foreign threats, and the limitations of the Articles of Confederation. The political landscape within the former colonies was highly polarized, with strong viewpoints that were difficult to reconcile. Two primary coalitions emerged during this time, the Loyalists and the Cosmopolitans. Loyalists included farmers, artisans, and militia veterans, and were deeply distrustful of a strong centralized government. They favored policies like paper money, debtor relief, and fair salaries for representatives, allowing ordinary people to serve in public office. On the other hand, cosmopolitans, comprised of merchants, professionals, urban artisans, commercial farmers, southern planters, and former army officers, supported more aggressive trade policies, hard currency, and the repayment of debts. They also believed in offering higher salaries for executive officers and judges and extending leniency to loyalists. These contrasting viewpoints demonstrated the range of concerns that had to be addressed in any new form of government. A successful constitution would need to balance the interests of those who feared central authority with those who believed a stronger federal government was essential for stability and growth. The diverse needs and concerns of these coalitions reflected the fractured nature of American politics in the 1780s and underscored the difficulty of creating a unified government. Foreign threats also loomed large, increasing the pressure for a more effective national government. The United States, having lost the protection of the British Empire, was now vulnerable to attacks from external forces. In the Mediterranean, Barbary pirates continued to capture and enslave American sailors, while European powers posed economic and territorial challenges. One notable example was John Jay's failed attempt to negotiate a treaty with Spain for protection and trading rights. Congress rejected the treaty because 5 southern states disapproved, demonstrating how the existing system allowed a minority of states to derail critical foreign policy decisions. This highlighted the need for a more efficient process for treaty approval and domestic legislation, one that could prevent small factions from obstructing national interests. In response to these issues, delegates convened in Philadelphia in 1787 to revise, or, as it turned out, create a new constitution for the United States. The political, economic, and foreign challenges of the 1780s heavily influenced their work, as the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation became more apparent. The new Constitution sought to create a stronger federal government capable of addressing the political divisions, economic crises, and external threats that the country faced, while still accommodating the diverse views of Loyalists and cosmopolitan factions. The result was a system of checks and balances that balanced state and federal power, safeguarded individual liberties, and laid the groundwork for a more unified and effective nation. The debates surrounding the ratification of the Constitution were intense and ultimately helped to strengthen the document, creating a foundation for a more robust federal government. After the Constitutional Convention, the proposed Constitution was sent to the states for approval. A resolution called for state conventions to debate and accept the new framework, and it would go into effect once 9 states approved it, despite the Articles of Confederation requiring unanimous consent for amendments. While the framers hoped for unanimous approval, they recognized that convincing all states would be challenging. The Federalists, who supported the new Constitution, played a significant role in advocating for its adoption. Leading Federalists, such as Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay, wrote 85 essays collectively known as the Federalist Papers. These essays, published in newspapers, offered detailed defenses of the Constitution, addressing a wide array of concerns about its provisions. The Federalists were generally aligned with the Cosmopolitan Coalition, advocating for a strong central government that could manage trade, defense, and interstate issues more effectively than the weak system under the Articles of Confederation. On the other side, the Anti-Federalists, composed largely of localists, raised concerns about the Constitution's lack of a Bill of Rights. They feared that without explicit protections, the new government would infringe on individual liberties. Anti-Federalists also argued that the new federal government would be too distant and powerful, particularly pointing to the large districts of 30,000 people for each representative, which they believed would ensure that only wealthy and prominent individuals would be elected, further alienating ordinary citizens. Although the Federalists ultimately won the debate and the Constitution was ratified, their victory came with significant concessions. The Federalists realized that in order to secure the final support of some states like North Carolina and Rhode Island, they would need to address the concerns about individual rights. As a result, the new Congress drafted a Bill of Rights, a set of amendments that would safeguard fundamental liberties such as freedom of speech, religion, and the press. This Bill of Rights was ratified in 1791, helping to unify the country around the new constitutional framework and easing the concerns of many anti-federalists. The debates over the Constitution, while divisive, ultimately strengthened the document by incorporating a broader range of perspectives and ensuring protections for individual rights. This process of debate and compromise laid the groundwork for a more balanced government that could be trusted to uphold both federal authority and personal liberties.